Hello, and this time on the Mortgage and Protection podcast, we're talking all about how getting a buy-to-let mortgage through a limited company. I've read that.
Oh, you should have just spelled it out,
Oh,
Tessa.
I usually do. Can your editor cut this? Or do you do it?
No, it's fine. Just spell it out. It's all good. It's all
Let's
good.
start again. Right, take
Lovely
two.
start to a podcast. I'm sure it's happened before.
It doesn't. Oh, here we go. Right, it's because it's a mouthful. Sorry. Right, that you can just cut that bit. There we go. Here we go.
Take two.
Take two. Hello, and this time on the Mortgage and Protection podcast, we're talking all about how getting a buy-to-let mortgage through a limited company works with Paul from Henchurch Lane. Welcome back, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Tessa. How are you today?
I'm very well. I'm really good, thanks. How are you?
Good. Yes, very good. Thank you. Very good.
Good.
Looking forward to this one.
Yes, definitely. Well, shall we get straight into the questions then that people are asking?
Let's do it.
Okay, so first of all, then, can I get a buy-to-let mortgage in a limited company? Is it difficult to get a buy-to-let mortgage in a limited company?
Yes. So you can get a buy-to-let mortgage through a limited company, and it's actually becoming an increasingly popular option for landlords. And this is due to potential tax benefits. However, the process can be slightly more complex than if you were to get a buy-to-let in a personal name. So I suppose the answer to the second part of that question, is it more difficult? I'd say in a word, yes. And there are fewer lenders that are going to be at your disposal if you're looking to buy via a limited company, and it's going to be more time consuming. And on top of that, it's probably going to be more costly. So I think most would define those things as more difficult, quote unquote. So, you might ask yourself, why would anybody want to buy a property through a limited company if it is more difficult, more time consuming, and more expensive? But
Mm.
I'm sure we'll answer that, or why you might want to do that in the remainder of this podcast, I'm sure.
Yes, definitely. And actually, the next question does follow on. So you touched on it there, but is it worth setting up a limited company for buy-to-let to go into a little bit more detail there?
Yeah, so it can be definitely, it can be worth your time. So it's going to be on a case by case basis, of course, and that's always the case for anything mortgage related. But generally speaking, I'd say if you're already in the high rate tax bracket, or you could be going
Mm,
forwards, it's likely to work out more tax efficient in the long term.
mm,
So if you're always going to be in the lower rate tax bracket, for argument's sake, in the lower rate tax band, and you don't have any interest in owning more than one buy-to-let property, then it might not necessarily be for you. So that's why it's a good idea just to discuss a case-by-case basis.
mm.
Everyone's tax position, everyone's intentions going forwards are going to be totally different. So once you kind of explain those wants and needs and certain circumstances, before you start, it allows you to put something together that is, sustainable as a strategy. Okay. Because if you're
Mm.
looking to do this within a limited company, then realistically, it is a business, and a business will need a business model, and it's
Mm.
all about profitability and long-term sustainability. So, ironing out your intentions with someone to begin with is really going to, let's say, set yourself up going forwards, and you're not going to make any wrong choices that later on down the line you'll really regret.
Okay, so some points there to bear in mind then, all about weighing up those pros and cons, it sounds like. And with that in mind, of course, and if someone is looking to do this, how do I get a buy-to-let mortgage through a limited company? So what is the process?
Okay. So here's the main steps that you're likely going to need to take. And I would argue that this is probably the right way around to do it, but it doesn't matter if you've done things in the wrong order. I would just suggest, if you're starting from a clean slate, to do them in this order. So number one, you're going to need a limited company. If you haven't got one already, it needs to be registered at Companies House, and it's usually advisable that it's in something called or as something called an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, and that's going to be solely for the purpose of property. So there are realistically two SIC codes, and these are codes that you put into the application when creating these properties. There's two SIC codes that you're going to need to input. That's
Mm.
68100, which is buying of own real estate, and the second is 68209, and that's the letting and operating of own or leased real estate. So they're the two codes that you need to use when setting that company up. At that point, you've got a SPV, right? So you're ready to go from a limited company perspective, but you're going to need a business account, bank account, that is, business bank account, to be linked to that. And that's going to handle all the incoming and the outgoing transactions related to those properties held within that limited company. Number three, I would suggest gathering some documentation. So getting all your ducks in a row from an evidence perspective. Lenders are going to ask you for ID. They're going to ask for bank statements. They're going to ask for income proof. And at that point where you've gathered all of that, I would then, next stage, suggest speaking to a broker. And in all honesty, if there's one application that you really don't want to try and progress yourself, it's a limited company purchase. So bear that in mind. Whatever a broker charges you is likely to be saved tenfold if you're utilising their experience and their knowledge. They're also likely to help complete the additional documentation, which is going to come, upon the submission of the application, which are going to be things like a business plan, a property schedule, personal guarantees, and things like that. Okay. So that comes hand in hand with submitting the mortgage application. Once you're happy with the recommendation, you submit the mortgage application whilst selecting and instructing a solicitor who are going to carry out the legal work and try and ensure that that solicitor is experienced in limited company purchases as well, because there are loads of solicitors out there that will not have touched these types of transactions. Not very good having those in your corner when you're trying to buy through a limited company. At that point, you can kind of sit back. So the mortgage broker and the solicitor are going to be working on getting your mortgage offer, and the solicitor is going to be handling all the contract side of things. And once everything's approved and ready to go, then your company is going to effectively own that property upon completion. Now, that bit after submission to completion sounds relatively straightforward. That's going to be, a relatively drawn out transaction. But at the point where you have a broker and a solicitor dealing with the transaction for you, anything that you're needed or anything that is needed from you should be prompted by either one of those parties.
Right, okay. Well, a brilliant breakdown there from start to sort of end. So hopefully that all makes sense. The next question follows on really. You've explained it a bit there. How do limited company buy-to-let mortgages work? What's the eligibility criteria? So anything else to add here?
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned above, it's usually going to be in that SPV that we mentioned, that special purpose vehicle. You're going to need to pass a credit score. So that's pretty standard. That's going to be on a personal basis. So a lot of people think because it's a limited company, that it's a separate entity. It is, but it's almost just a holding or a tax wrapper situation. So it's still going to be stressed with you personally in mind. So they'll do a credit check on you. Some lenders are going to have minimum income requirements. A typical one might be 25 grand. Some don't. And each lender is going to have their own property criteria. So, depending on what lender you go to, will depend on what properties fit the bill with them. But that's going to be generally the same as it would be if you were to buy it in any other application type. What else? I would say most lenders are going to insist that you already own a residential property. So it's unlikely they're going to let first-time landlords buy a buy-to-let in a limited company. So that's a criteria that you might want to be looking at as well. And most are going to need some sort of personal guarantee in the background too. So like I say, although it's a limited company, there are still going to be some ties to you personally in the background. So it's worth bearing those sorts of things in mind. A lot of people have got misconceptions when it comes to limited companies because of, your normal trading limited companies that you'd operate a business from. Slightly different than those.
Okay, brilliant. There we go. So again, some useful points there when it comes to eligibility. Of course, this is always a popular question, Paul. So how much deposit do I need for a buy-to-let through a limited company, just to confirm?
Yeah, okay. So I'd say generally a minimum is going to be the sort of 25% mark, but it's not as straightforward as that. And I'll try and explain why. It's not a given that you can secure the remaining 75% on a mortgage. So the figure that you're going to be securing on that mortgage is going to be driven by the rental amount that the subject property is going to achieve, basically. So if the rental isn't quite where it needs to be to borrow 75%, then quite clearly you're going to need a larger deposit to bridge that gap. Okay, so it's worth bearing that in mind. It's not as simple as just saying you need a 25% deposit. You might need 30, 35%, depending on how good the rental potential is from that property that you're buying.
Okay, so that's clear there then when it comes to deposits. Now, just moving on to this question, let's look at this. So, do limited companies pay stamp duty on buy-to-lets, and what other costs are involved so that we might not have talked about yet?
Sure. Yes, you will pay stamp duty if you purchase property generally. Within a limited company, you're going to pay the standard rate plus a surcharge. Okay, so whatever the standard rate is for that property price, but any buy-to-lets are going to attract a surcharge of stamp duty as well, which is currently set at 5% of the purchase price. So let's say you buy £200,000, you'd pay your normal bit of stamp duty on that, and then you'd pay an extra £10,000. And that's as of February 2025. So it's worth bearing that in mind
Mm,
because things like stamp duty do change all the time. So to confirm that, depending on what time in the future you might be listening to this.
mm.
Um, Other costs that will be applied to this sort of transaction, they're going to vary. Most of the other costs are going to vary depending on who you instruct, but they're likely to include things like broker fees, solicitor fees, valuation fees, product fees from the lender, and more than likely independent legal advice as well. It's worth factoring that one in because it's
Mm,
sometimes between sort of £300 and £500, which I would say anything above £100, £200, definitely worth budgeting for, because they can build up.
mm. Definitely, yes. Always useful to know what to budget for, isn't it? There.
It's,
So we've got three questions left. Again, you've touched on this, I think, probably earlier on, but what are the benefits and drawbacks of owning property through a buy-to-let limited company? So anything else we need to know here, or some
yeah,
top pointers here?
sure. So yeah, we touched on things previously
Mm,
in the other questions, but generally, all the benefits that are related to having a property within a limited company versus personally, sorry, are going to be based around tax efficiency. That's the whole
mm,
point. Um, but if you make something more tax efficient, then as a result, it's more likely or easier, some may say, to grow or to scale that business as well, much quicker than you would if you were paying out all of the money, all of your profits in tax. So if you're in it for profit, like I would argue a lot of people are,
mm,
because it is a business, then the additional work that's going to be involved, I think, will of course long term be worth it. Okay, and on the flip side of that, I would say all the drawbacks are mostly linked to things like cost or upfront costs and time investment. So it's initially going to be or seem more expensive to secure these products versus a personal buy to let. And it's going to seem, or it definitely will actually take more of your time to secure and to go through that transaction. However, to summarize, I would say, within most businesses, you do need to speculate to accumulate. And generally,
mm,
things that are going to drive more profit in life are likely to be harder to attain, right? So
mm.
the proof's in the pudding there, really.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like we said, it's all about weighing up the pros and cons, isn't it, as well there. But okay, so let's look at this question. How does remortgaging a buy-to-let property work through a limited company? Any differences here?
Um, so not really. The transaction itself that we've explained above, all of those nuances are likely to be the same when you remortgage a buy-to-let property in a limited company. Remortgages versus purchases are always going to be that little bit easier, or should be, because um, you're removing the additional parties that are involved. There's no vendor involved, there's no seller of the property. It's just you
Mm,
moving the mortgage from one lender to another lender. So although there will be, legal work and costs and all those things that will be involved, it generally should be an easier, more straightforward transaction than a purchase. But it's going to be, it's going to be very similar to the differences when you personally buy a property versus personally remortgage a property.
mm.
Um, yeah, there's not a great deal of difference to it, if I'm honest.
That's good news there, then. And then just lastly, we always end on this note, and you've demonstrated it as well. But how can a mortgage broker help here? Anything else we need to know?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing here is business plan. I would say, a lot of people at the moment are hearing about the benefits of buying buy-to-lets in a limited company. It's definitely a hot topic right now.
Mm,
Even if people are buying one, there's a good chance it's still going to be better for them to buy it in a limited company. However, there are lots of differences that need to be factored in it's not just a case of buying a property because it's a good investment. This is a more of a long-term strategy. And having things like an exit plan and knowing what your long-term intentions are, just to make sure that you're not going to, let's say, cut your nose off to spite your face. You need to make sure that
Mm,
you've got the right plan in place, and a good broker who is versed within limited company purchases is going to be able to effectively not see into the future, but strategize with you for however you intend to grow as a landlord, if that's one property or if that's 50 properties.
mm.
Having them on your side is going to be really helpful for you, and you'll be able to get to that end goal a great deal quicker, in my opinion. So, yeah, even more so than ever, this is one of the more complex situations.
Okay, so a great episode to cover, really. Words of wisdom there. There you go,
Thank
to
you.
take away. Thank you for that as always, Paul. Hopefully that has proved useful to anybody listening to this, watching this video. And we'll be back with another episode soon.
Yes, we will. Great. Thank you for your time, Tessa. See you later.
Catch you soon. Bye.